Andrew Fraser is a former lawyer. He's also been on the inside. He knows what prisoners like. Mr. Fraser, thanks for joining us here.
My pleasure, Tom.
Has justice been done with Adrian Bayley?
Yes, you just listen to that poor father. You can only just imagine what he's going through. But I think I was actually a bit in your camp. I thought Bayley would get life with no minimum. It seems that he's a very slow learner, if at all.
Justice Nettle, in fact, has given out life with no minimum in the past, but it seems that because Bayley did plead guilty, I guess that weighs slightly in his favour. Frankly, I've never understood why.
How could he not plead guilty?
Well,
let's be sensible about this. He makes full and frank admissions and then takes the police to where the body's buried.
I suppose, though, that the reason they give small discounts on sentences for pleading guilty is that way you do get people pleading guilty at all. Otherwise, I say, why would you bother?
I understand.
But look, leaving that aside, I mean, Adrian Bayley is now 41 years old. Assuming we do not change the laws, the parole board, whatever it is, in the next 3.5 decades, and he serves his full 35 years in prison, he'll be 76 before he gets out. Two questions: what will his life be like inside? And secondly, will he last 35 years?
To answer the first question, he'll almost certainly go into protection. And protection is a greater madhouse than mainstream is, because there are 3 types of prisoners that are put into protection, and they're all mixed in together. First, those that require protection, like Bayley.
Right, and this is protection from other prisoners.
Yes, and then, but also in there they put in the prisoners that the other prisoners should be protected from. That is, the people that are gratuitously violent.
So the real nutters.
The real nutters turn into a third category.
Right.
And so you put all 3 together in protection, and he will be subject to dealing with those day in and day out for the next 35 years.
Now again, it's sort of hard to mince words here, so I won't. But the point is, if a man molests a child, for example, he is the lowest of the low.
He's in a different category to somebody that might shoot somebody during an armed robbery.
Okay, but I mean, raping and killing a young woman like Jill Maher, presumably this makes Adrian Bayley the most unpopular person inside prison.
He's the bottom feeder of bottom feeders.
Okay, now, again, you've experienced it inside. Do the prison authorities turn a blind eye to abuse of prisoners, people like Adrian Bayley who are in for a long time, or do they genuinely try and stop it?
Let me tell you what happens. A fight starts or somebody's stabbed. The prison officers are ordered to stand back, and it's not like you see on the TV where they pull out the truncheons and jump in.
Just let it go.
No, they stand back until everybody's punched out, then they move in with their truncheons.
Okay.
So by that time, Bayley is close to death or dead.
Do you think Bayley has any inkling what's in store for him?
He's done a lot of jail, so I'd be amazed if he didn't.
Yeah.
And he would... And one, I think, it wouldn't surprise me if the Crown appealed against the leniency of his sentence to start with, but he's a real suicide risk, I think.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a whole lot of things there, but I mean, essentially, the prison authorities put him in with the violent nutters and the other nutters, and they're all kept together. I mean, does he have to, sleep with one eye open, to always look behind him every step of the day?
Well, it's the 3 wise monkeys routine. You see no evil, hear no evil, and speak no evil. And how I survived it was I kept myself to myself. I spent a lot of time in my own cell once I finally got a single cell with the door snibbed, because lots of blokes get stabbed in their cells.
Yeah.
And so I ran my own race. You could almost call him a career criminal, even though they're sexual offences. He's in and out of jail all the time. He's going to probably, I assume, want to try and ingratiate himself with one of the gangs that exist in every unit in the jail.
Well, some of the nutters that he's in with, will they want to make his life a living hell just because they don't like what he's done? I mean, is there some kudos, some status for them in doing that?
Oh, absolutely. But you see, he'll also be in with blokes like Leslie Camilleri or Peter Dupas. And they're the last ones to throw a stone while they're living in a glass house. However, on the other side of the coin, there are blokes in there that are just plain mad, and they will consider stabbing him to be a feather in their cap.
Okay, so even though many of us, myself included, think that actually his sentence was too light, 35 years is a long time, but it should have been life, or indeed if we still had capital punishment, we should have had that. The fact is, his 35 years, if he lasts that long, will be a living hell.
It will be shocking. There's no short answer to that. And
is this almost like an unofficial level of punishment that these sort of serious offenders undergo in prison? The prison itself is so awful.
Yes, prison, I wouldn't recommend it to anybody.
No.
And 5 years was bad enough. To do 35, it's so long. There is no light at the end of the tunnel. It's all very well for an academic judge to sit there, or an academic prosecutor, or a defence counsel, but the reality is, the door slammed behind him at about 11 o'clock this morning, and the awful realisation will have hit him. I've got 35 years. I'm not that old.
I mean, most of us cannot comprehend thinking that far into the future, can we?
Nobody does.
No.
And so it may as well be life no minimum.
Yeah.
Because at 76, the chances are you don't live as long in jail, and the statistics show that. So, because the food's no good, there's no exercise, there's all these things that go with it, unless you're super motivated.
You get bashed and stabbed by your fellow inmates.
Yeah, and then you get one in the jugular quickly in the food queue. You don't tend to last too long.
Finally, Andrew, look, the issue of capital punishment. I mean, Ronald Ryan, of course, was the last man executed in Victoria way back in 1967, the year that I was born, so it's 46 years ago now. I am just a boy. Were we to reintroduce capital punishment into this state, do you think someone like Adrian Bayley would be a prime candidate for it?
Well, as a defence lawyer, I was dead against, no pun intended, but I was very much against the concept of capital punishment. Having lived with Mr Stinky, Ray Edmonds and Peter Dupas and these blokes, I've changed my mind.
Right, so the most serious offenders?
No, they fall into certain categories. The most serious offenders as child murderers and rapist murderers fill two of those categories. And I wouldn't have the slightest hesitation in recommending that Bayley take the long walk off the short rope.
Do you think there's any chance in our lifetimes that the state of Victoria or any state in Australia might reintroduce capital punishment?
Well, I think there is, because what the politicians tell us we want is, in my experience, completely different to what the real people tell me. And I speak to people every day of the week because of my history and because of my writing now. People talk to me every day of the week and say, easily the majority, and I would say an absolute majority, are in favour of capital punishment.
I've read that, and I believe it's the same in the United Kingdom as well.
And they won't put it before us
no.
because they know the answer, and it's a very unpalatable answer.
It's funny because in America, where arguably they are more democratic than us, people get to vote on who their judges are, who their police chiefs are, as well as their politicians. Half the American states still have capital punishment because people say that's what we want for these serious offenders.
Yeah, but their system is broken in that it's too convoluted, and you can sit on death row for 30 years.
And that's not right either.
That's not right. That is harsh and unusual punishment in the extreme, and people shouldn't have to suffer that.
Andrew Fraser, good to talk with you. Thank you very much for coming in here. Andrew Fraser there, spent 5 years behind bars, has some pretty horrific experiences to tell us about, but says basically that Adrian Bayley's 35 years, if he lasts that long, will be a living hell, and so it should be. Nick, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Tom and Andrew. I hear that Adrian Bayley has got 38 years, but the only part that disturbs me is that after, say, 20, when he's a good little fellow and he's a goody two-shoes and he regrets and everything he's done, can he apply to be let out on parole, as he's done before, as all these other criminals have done before, and they're all out within 10 or 15? I don't know, but is this possible?
Andrew, you can answer that.
Well, I can tell you now that the law has changed in relation to that, and that now, the 35, he's got life as his head sentence, and he's got 35 as the minimum.
Right.
Now, once upon a time, you used to serve two-thirds of your minimum. He doesn't do that anymore, so he won't be out after 20. What his minimum is, 35, is what he does.
Adrian Fraser is still with me. He's a former lawyer, spent several years behind bars, and we've been talking about the living hell that Adrian Bayley so richly deserves, and which he will get between now and the next 35 years of his life, if he lasts that long. In about 5 minutes' time as well, we'll speak to Mark Latham, former leader of the opposition, and the question that will not go away in federal politics is, will the Labor Party turn on their leader, Julia Gillard, and reinstate Kevin Rudd? If it's going to happen, it has to happen within the next 8 days. Otherwise, everybody leaves Canberra, and challenges like this are impossible. Keep the calls coming, 96900 693, outside Melbourne, 13 13 32. Stephen, hello.
Andrew, fascinating insight. Having watched the series about your life, tell us, the average punter like ourselves, though, as a deterrent, what's life like? Well, what's this guy going to do for 35 years? What's his daily routine?
Daily routine, what's called hand-on trap muster at about 7:30. They open the trap door in your door and make sure you're not dead. and then they've got a list there, and the screw says 1, and they go right round the unit saying 1, and most of the time they get the addition wrong.
What was your number?
My
or do
correct,
they just go 1 add them all
1,
up?
yeah,
Right,
and go 1 and 1 and 1 and hopefully get to 38, and when they get to 37 they've got a problem. But I can still remember the correctional reference number 160822. You say it that many times. But you let out about 8:30, might go to the gym a couple of days a week, come back, lunch, midday, muster at midday, followed by lunch in inverted commas. Nothing organised during the afternoon.
Is the food pretty terrible?
Food's appalling.
Right.
Yes, I won't say any more than that. I applied to do another degree, and I was told I had to be assessed as being suitable for education, and
even though you had a law degree already.
Yes, and that took 1 year for that assessment. And there we are. So that's how it doesn't work in jail.
So it's extraordinarily dull.
Boredom is what I was just going to say. The boredom kills you if the knives don't.
Stephen, thank you very much for the call. Roy, hello.
Yeah, Tom, Andrew. I'm an ex-member, and a friend of mine who stayed in the job for some 30 years and is now retired sat down with a group of ex-members and serving. They came up with 27 names of people, innocent people who would be alive today had the people who murdered them been kept on, were not released on parole for the violent crimes that they had committed, and that is in the last 2.5 years.
Yes, well, I don't doubt that for a moment. Peter Dupas, for instance, I am firmly of the view murdered somebody at Frankston while he was on allegedly supervised day release. Of course, guess what? No supervision, somebody's dead.
Craig, thank you very much for the call. Look, we do need to move on, but Andrew Fraser, again, I appreciate your time.
Pleasure.
Good luck with your medical treatment, and thank you for sharing your insights this afternoon.
My pleasure. Thanks, Tom.